welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is another brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We're nearing the very, very end of season 6, whatever episode this is. We're probably going to move away from single episodes because things are going to change and get jumbly. So I'm your host, Sam Snelling. You can see my name right here. And I am without a co-host today. No Matt Watkins, no Matt Harris. Instead, it's going to be just me and a long discussion with my good friend Blake Lovell. Blake is one of the managing editors at 14 Southeastern. They do a great job covering all SEC sports, whether it's football, basketball, baseball. You can get all your SEC coverage there. If you are familiar with our podcast, you are familiar with Blake. We are always big fans of his work. He's, at this point, I would consider him a friend. And he knows the entire league as well as anybody that covers the league. So it's going to be me and him. We were shooting for 30 minutes. We went to about 50. So I hope you stick through the whole thing and listen to everything, because I thought Blake had some really interesting points. And as we know, he loves Dennis Gates. So without any further ado, here's Blake Lovell. And I'd like to welcome in to our podcast, our video podcast, if you're watching on the YouTubes, longtime friend of the pod, one of my favorites to talk to, all-time great guy, SEC basketball savant, the Blake Lovell from 14 Southeastern. Blake, are you guys going to rename that site when Texas?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. Don't worry. Like we stop people before they even finish their question. Now we're like, don't worry, it's coming. We already got the 16. We got all these numbers. So, we apologize to anyone who's trying to take those numbers. But yeah, we were getting ready for the super conference era in the SEC, since that's the buzzword, is the super conference. So we'll be 16 once Texas and Oklahoma officially join. We're going to make that switch over next summer, I think. And so, yeah, coming soon, but always fun to join you. As we said, the first time we've done this video-wise. So it's just, it's great to be able to peer into each other's souls when it comes to talking about SEC basketball, because what better conversation to have when doing that than SEC basketball. So, and
our first sort of, face-to-face talk since you were in St. Louis for the SEC tournament, I think. So
man, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Although as a frequent watcher of 14 Southeastern, I feel like you're a part of my life all the time.
Well, now you're a part of mine, because now I get to see you more often as well. So that's how this works. So,
well, welcome. So our plan here is we're gonna just spend a few minutes here talking about the offseason, the SEC offseason, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes towards the end of the interview discussion here to just talk about your favorite person in all of the SEC land, and that's Dennis Gates. I'm going to give everybody a little preview here. So anybody who has followed along with us and with Blake knows he is a guy who is quite fond of Missouri's head basketball coach, almost to the point where I believe it's a SEC Twitter meme at this point. Mm-hmm. But sort of kicking things off, the transfer portal has completely changed the game, and as far as like what your offseason is going to look like from the moment the season ends to really kind of like the first few weeks of June when players start hitting campus. Like that period used to sort of be a little quiet period where you're just sort of maybe adjusting for a few spots. Now it's like full-blown roster turnover, where probably half of the league is turning over half of their roster at minimum. And so with all this movement, I thought it would be good to kind of get your take and see who we thought would maybe had the best offseason, who has been really, really good, who's added impact players. And so I guess just starting at the top, in your opinion, who has had the best offseason in the SEC?
Boy, I feel like I'm going to get pretty long-winded here, because I honestly, I think there's a lot of teams that have had good offseasons. And sometimes we don't always say that. Sometimes we're like, maybe 5-6 teams or maybe they got worse, right? But I mean, if you look at even just the bottom tier of the SEC, maybe minus South Carolina, like, I think you could say LSU has had one of the best off seasons when you look at kind of the guys they're bringing in, all things considered, where they were last year. So in comparison to that, maybe you make the argument for them. But I think specifically, and it's probably not a coincidence that to me, these would be the two teams, and this may answer a question you're going to have later. And I apologize if I'm doing that this early, but I think the two teams to me that still stand out at the top above everyone else, I think are probably the two teams that you can say had the best offseason, and for different reasons. Arkansas, to me, I think put together a roster that was one that they get guys back that are important, specifically Devo Davis. I think that was one of the biggest wins of the offseason for anybody, because I look at this team without him and I think, okay, they're missing those things that he brings to the table, because I don't know if there's anybody that can replicate that on this roster. But the fact that they get him back, it's the same thing. And I know we're touching a sore spot here, but with Trevin Brazil, I mean, it's the same sort of situation where you get those two back, and I think that's your starting point. But it's also all the guys that they brought in. I'm a huge Tremont Mark. I guess I could say I'm a Tremont Mark. Right. I think he is exactly what Arkansas needs. I mean, he's coming over from a Houston team that defended, does all the little things, and I think that he's going to bring that to this team. And I'm really excited to see kind of how he fits in. I'm curious to see how an Ellis fits into an Arkansas team and not a Louisville team that was just so bad. But I think his scoring ability really helps on this team. And again, I think it's really the guys they brought back, but also all these guys they're bringing in. And I mean, I think we could always say, but I mean, you can't forget about the two freshmen too. Like, these are two really, really good freshmen. And so we always say that about Muss. I mean, he's kind of been the king of the transfer portal. I don't know how this team compares to other ones, but I think you have to put them near the top of the list, just because you look at, again, what they have, but it's also those two guys they brought back specifically. And I know they brought back Mekhi Mitchell, which is important, I think, from just having another big guy, because they were kind of thin there. I think a lot of people would look at their front court and maybe still feel like they're a little thin, although they did add, Chandler Lawson and such, and they've got Fall coming in. But I'm really impressed as usual, I think, with Arkansas. And, the other one I think is Tennessee. And to me, Tennessee's best offseason did not come just by who they added, it's by who came back. And, getting Josiah Jordan-James back, I don't know, we expected that. Like, I mean, really, like, I did not think that was going to happen. And
so it feels like he's been there forever.
I know, right? Like, I feel like he's been there 7 years. And
I get people make jokes about Vescovi,
yeah,
and how long he's been on the roster, but I feel like Josiah Jordan-James has been there like much longer. Like, I feel like he was a junior when Vescovi joined the team.
Well, but what's funny about that is, like, I feel like Zakai Ziegler's been there like 5 years now, and like, he's just now a junior. And so it's like, but that's the reason why for me with Tennessee is that they got those three guys back specifically. And, I know they lost Chris Ledlam, who was there and then ultimately went to St. John's. But I think when you look at just having that trio, for me, I mean, Tennessee, you can win a lot of games with those three guys. Obviously not playing 3-on-5, but if you have those three guys on the floor together, they've already won a lot of games together. And to get that entire group back, basically your entire guard wing oriented part of it's significant. And so I think that, we see it like Awaka. I know you've seen it. Like, yeah. He is one of the breakout guys probably in the SEC when you consider the step he's going to take from freshman to sophomore. And so you're adding him to the mix.
Guy who was on the USA under-19 team who, played really well overseas. Yeah. I think Awaka's a guy who could, be taking a big step this year.
And then, like, it's, Adu, he took a step forward last year. Now another year of experience. He's going to get some more minutes probably this year. Mayshak, someone else who I think we saw start to become like that Rick Barnes type guard that could do a lot of different things for them. And then, you add a couple very intriguing guys. I think Dalton Connect is probably the most intriguing of the group for me. I think offensively, he will bring a lot to the table for this team. I know everybody said, well, defensively, what does that look like on a team like this that's used to being one of the best defensive teams in the country? I get it, but like, at the same time, look at all the other players though that are surrounding them. They've got great defensive players across the board, and the guys we've already mentioned. So Jordan Gainey, joins the mix. And so I look at this Tennessee team with everything they got back. I thought that was the biggest part of the equation. And so I would probably put Arkansas, Tennessee, at the top of the group. But like I said, Sam, I really could go down the list and look at a team like Florida. I thought Todd Golden had one of the best, most well-executed transfer plans of anybody, because he went out and got exactly what they needed. They needed size to kind of fill the void that they're losing with Colin Castleton. They needed shooting. He went out and got guys that could shoot. They needed quick guards. He put everything together, I think, to be able to do that. And so Florida's another team that I'd put up there. I know we'll talk about Missouri later, but I think Missouri did some good things as usual, I think, with Dennis Gates. But I guess the other team I have to mention, and I kind of forgot to do this off the top, and I know everyone's seen how high we are on Ole Miss. Of course, this is all considering if these guys are available, right? Like, some of these guys are 2-time transfers. I always say, I don't know how you feel about this, but I just assume everyone's going to get, a waiver to play these days. I know it's like the new NCAA, but come on. Like, I just assume people are going to play. But if you just look at roster wise, I think you can even throw Ole Miss in the argument of being in there with Arkansas and Tennessee in terms of best offseason, because of how drastically different their roster is. And it's getting Brakefield back. It's getting Matthew Morrell back. But it's also adding all these different pieces. Brandon Murray, who we've seen in the league before at LSU, I think he's going to be probably one of the better scorers when he steps back into the league again, just because of what he did at Georgetown. Alan Flanagan, we know what he can be. Then, of course, you've got two guys that are just, gigantic in Sharp and Cisse. And so no surprise that Chris Beard's done that with the roster. You can say what you want about off the court stuff, but if you're just looking at the roster, that's one that's turned over probably as much as anybody in terms of the talent they brought in. So,
well, and I think anybody who pays attention, at least to my writing and any writing at Rock'em Nation, knows we were really high on the talent level of the Ole Miss roster. Even going into last year, it was just a question. Kermit just had never seemed to kind of put it all together. Like Matthew Morrell, I think I honestly thought like if he could have been a second round pick. Like he's like got the build that you want for the NBA. He could shoot the ball. He's really the kind of guy that I think could excel, under a coach who, and I don't want to like disparage Kermit, because I think we all like respect what he did at Middle Tennessee, and he was really, really good there. He just never quite put it all together at Ole Miss.
Injuries hurt too. Like they just, I feel like they always had injuries there. But that was just part of the puzzle, right? It wasn't the whole thing, but they had some bad luck with injuries too. So
he's saying hi to Georgia here. That's Georgia.
Hello, Georgia.
Yeah. And then Hugo's sleeping. So we
already put to sleep 10 minutes into the conversation.
Yeah. It's okay. He sleeps through everything. We just had a thunderstorm here a little bit ago, and he is knocked out the whole time. So I want to go back to Arkansas a little bit, because I would agree with you that I think Arkansas has had a really good off season, mainly because I think and what went wrong for Arkansas last year. And I realize we can point to the injuries and all those kinds of things, but I thought what really went wrong for Arkansas last year is Muss went a little against what he has been so good about through his time there in Fayetteville. Like he went away from just being crazy athletic, guard the hell out of you, and be really simple on offense, because he was really focusing on, all right, how are we going to get like these star freshmen involved and ready to go. And of course, they couldn't shoot, so they had all the athleticism, but not being able to shoot the ball made winning games difficult. I see a lot of similarities with this roster. And while I like that he's sort of embraced what he's good at, we're going to guard the hell out of you. He's got all these dudes who are really long and athletic. I don't really see a lot of scoring and shooting. And I think at this point you could probably trust that Musselman will figure out a way to win, quite a few games. But it does sort of concern you that like he's fully leaning into this we don't need to be able to shoot the ball from outside thing, and we'll just make your life hell in the half court. Which like honestly, like when Konza Martin was the head coach at Mizzou and Musselman, he would have these like just grind out battles. It was some of the worst basketball you could ever watch. Like 47 charge calls in a game, and it just feels like that was every Mizzou Arkansas game. So, I mean, is there at any point do you think Muss is going to sort of change his type and try to add a little bit of spacing to his floor game?
I mean, the way I see it is something else this team has is, and we've all kind of used it, I guess, as the buzzword over the past. I mean, we probably used it longer than just since March, but I mean, everybody talks about just teams that are older and what that can do for you. And I think he's leaned on that. I think, like you said, I think he's leaned on maybe not necessarily some of the things that have worked in the past, but I think it's, I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like it's just, you can never have too many options. And I don't know that you could look at this roster necessarily right now and tell me what the minute allocation is going to be 1 through 7. I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. I mean, I know Davis is probably going to play 35 minutes. I don't know how many minutes Brazil plays, but
he does sort of like it looks like a roster where you should see like 9 or 10 guys, but by the middle of the SEC season, it'll be 6-7 guys tops.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, even as some of these guys that came back, right? Like, I don't know how many minutes Jalen Graham's going to play. Like, because last year it was, one game it was like 3, the next game it was 25, right? And it's just, I think that's just what he likes. I mean, for whatever reason, like, I think it's just, there may not be that consistency game in a game. And that last year was a little different, as you said, because it's, you're kind of waiting on Nick Smith and you feel like you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And it was maybe a little bit different. But I think to me, they're the most intriguing team for the reasons you just brought up is, maybe they're not going to have the shooting, but I am fascinated to know who is going to play this many minutes at this position, who's going to be here. But I think they got enough options in terms of talent that if it all does come together, which as we always learn, there will be somebody that maybe doesn't turn out the way they think you're going to be. And I'm not going to take any guesses as to who that's going to be. But if it does, like, it's hard to look at this team and still not be like, oh boy, 1 through 10, they're as talented as anybody, and maybe probably more talented than anybody in the SEC, just from a pure talent standpoint. But like you said, I think the shooting and those kind of things, as we saw last year with Missouri, and that's what I keep bringing up with people, like in the offseason, they'll ask about certain things, and they're like, what can you do in this SEC landscape to kind of separate yourselves when everybody else is going out and getting all these transfers and they, all this talent and everybody's recruiting well? I said, it's pretty simple. I said, go out and find 3 guys that can shoot the ball. And, because otherwise most SEC teams are not going to have 3 guys that can shoot the ball. And Missouri saw that last year. I mean, as you know, it was one of those things that can really separate you. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's clearly something that you could look at this roster and be like, I don't know how many 3-point shots they make, but maybe they just continue their thing where we're just going to be so aggressive. It's going to be a foul shooting contest. And unfortunately, as we've seen at times with teams like Arkansas and Texas A&M, that method works, and they've made it work and turned it into a lot of wins. So maybe that's what we see again.
And they did sort of announce that Keon Menefield, who's the Washington transfer, will be a non-roster redshirt. So I think I heard a rumor that they're adding like another kind of combo 40 transfer late in the season here.
They never stop. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, and these days with NIL, like you just, some donor can come in and be like, all right, yeah, I'll pay his, realistically, like that was part of, Missouri's plan. If Kobe wanted to come back, he was not going to be on scholarship. They were just going to NIL his tuition. Okay. So, I think I agree with you on Tennessee. Also, like it's hard when you're as consistently good as Tennessee and you bring back so many guys. But we kind of chatted a little bit about LSU. LSU did a good job of upgrading their, and this is also another team that is going to rely on the 2-time transfer rule kind of, getting a waiver, because I think an important part of what they wanted to do was bring in Jalen Cook. And like Cook transferred from LSU to Tulane, was great. Transferred back now to LSU, and has really kind of developed into one of the best scoring guards in the country. But they kind of need him. Otherwise, I feel like they did a lot to upgrade the roster, but are these upgrades enough to sort of take them from the cellar, past the middle, or does it put them into the middle?
Yeah, I think what happened was, in comparison to where they were, it was a big upgrade. But if we remember where they were, it was not a good place. And so I think it gets them more towards trying to get towards the middle. I don't think it puts them in the conversation of, I don't think I would say they're an NCAA tournament team right now. Like I still think they're outside of that range, even with the upgrades they make. But at the same time, I think it's looking at a team that won 2 games? Is that right? 3 games in the SEC?
Yeah. So did that? How much did that surprise you? Because I saw him doing something similar to what Dennis Gates did, which is bring in guys that were familiar with him and familiar with his system. And I kind of thought that would work. They had some talented freshmen. They had some experience. They had KJ Williams, who was terrific, and they were bad all year.
I know I had a stat, and I've let my KenPom subscription lapse here. I just realized it expired last week. So how dare I? I apologize to Mr. Ken Pomeroy. I will update that as soon as this conversation is over. But
a little tip for you, which is what works for me, is mine renews in December, so I never miss a renewal.
That's a good idea. So yeah, for some reason mine's always been in the summer. So sometimes I'm like, I didn't look at it through the last couple of days, and there it went. So but one of the things that I think it was some kind of wild stat I had. I don't remember what it was, but it was just the number of games. I don't know, either they lost where they were just right there. The number of games they scored under, I don't remember the point total. I don't want to throw it out there. I want to say maybe it was 70 or something like that. But it's it was just amazing to see how close it felt like they were, but they just could not score the ball enough. And I think the consistency there is why they had so many issues, because at a certain point, I think teams just realize, okay, there's KJ Williams. He's going to score the ball. Maybe Adam Miller's going to score. Maybe Cam Hayes is going to score. But we don't know if we're going to necessarily game plan around that consistently, because it's just not there on a consistent basis, maybe. And so to me, that's where a Jalen Cook coming in, maybe that helps in some of those areas. Now, not having a KJ Williams is completely different than having him. So I don't know that this roster, and that's where you're banking on a lot of things to go right if you're going to make that big jump. And I don't think they're going to be as bad as they were last year. But again, this is a pretty unforgiving league, and they could finish 13th or 14th in the SEC. Even with what I think is a nice roster upgrade overall. You don't have a KJ Williams, but overall, I think the roster is better. But you're banking on Jordan Wright. You're banking on the potential of Damian Collins. You're banking on Jalen Cook to not drop scoring down from 20 to 10, because realistically, you probably need him scoring 15 points a game. You're banking on Will Baker coming from a Nevada and being a consistent post player in the SEC. You're banking on someone like Carlos Stewart. And really, Matt McMahon he's banking on the local flavor, right? How many of these guys are coming in that are from Louisiana and just trying to sort of rally somehow to put that all together, get the fan base kind of rallied around these guys, and sort of bring that energy back into the program, because it was gone last season. So I don't know. Like you said, it's certainly, I don't think LSU's an NCAA tournament team right now, but I do think if you look at the best case scenario, I could see them as a bubble type team. But I think there's a lot still to be determined on that, because they've got to consistently be much better offensively. Which they just could not do last season. So I'm curious to see what he and his staff have in mind for tweaking some of the things offensively that they just simply could not do last year.
Which brings us to
oh boy,
those who didn't quite get it all done. And so I kind of want to start this off. So I want you to convince me that Auburn's offseason wasn't as bad as I seem to think it was. Now, they are adding a top 20 level freshman point guard, and Aiden Holloway. They bring in Denver Jones from Florida International, who is sort of a high volume scorer there, bringing in a Division II wing and Chaney Johnson. And they're bringing a lot of guys back. I mean, Janai Brome's back. Katie Johnson back for another trip around the sun. Cardwell, Chris Moore, our man Lior Berman is back. Trey Donaldson had a nice season last year. He's back. And Jalen Williams, I think him coming back helps. But this is not, to me, it doesn't really feel like anywhere close to one of Bruce Pearl's best rosters. This is a lot of like role guys who they're going to play the way Auburn plays, and they're going to win some games. But I mean, would it shock you if this roster, like, they came in under 500 in the SEC?
Probably not, just because of some of the teams that have improved. I think they'll finish above 500, but like I could
more
find
like 10-8 then.
I was gonna say I could probably find, like, several other teams I feel better about right now. That maybe have more proven, I don't know what the word is, together than maybe this roster. I feel like we're so far removed now from the thought that Bruce Pearl teams just run and shoot and make threes. And like, I feel like it's so staggering now just to look at his teams since probably the Final Four team, right? With Bryce Brown and Jared Harper and those guys. I just don't, I mean, look, I know they're bringing in, like I said, Denver Jones, Chaney Johnson, Aiden Holloway can really shoot it. And so I think that, to me, is the biggest question. Is I think they significantly need to improve their 3-point shooting if they're going to be a team that I feel great about, because getting Broome back is huge. I mean, like I said, I think you could put him in the mix probably with the Tolu Smith, and I know I'm going to forget somebody, and maybe probably one of the Tennessee players, probably Vescovy, in terms of like SEC preseason player of the year type guy. Right. Just because the numbers are going to be there. I could see Broome averaging a double-double without question. And so getting him back is one of the biggest wins of the offseason. But I think you're still banking on, even though you're older, you're still banking on Jalen Williams taking his game to another level still. And he's done that, but like, I like him. I think he's one of the more underrated players, but he still needs to do, he still needs to take another step, I think, for them to get where they want to go. Katie Johnson, like I said, he's another guy I feel like he's been playing the SEC for 10 years. Cardwell, same thing. It's like you want to see the evolution and continued development of all these guys' game. And if that happens, they can put it all together. But yes, like Denver Jones coming in, has played in obviously an up-tempo type style at Florida International, like Bruce Pearl wants to play, which that's what Jeremy Ballard does at FIU. And, but the other guys, I think it's a wait and see approach probably to see exactly how they fit in. And, it does feel like a team that guard play is going to define everything, right? We always say that. Like, I look at the depth that they have in terms of their posts. Like, they got a lot. I mean, when you start with Broome, it's a good place to start, but like, you've got a lot of good forwards. You've got good post players, center type guys. It's just, you want to see how the guard stuff comes together. And I know I'm sure some people say, well, man, it's a significant upgrade over Wendell Green. I'm like, I don't know, man. I thought Wendell Green was,
Wendell Green was never great, but he was also, I think, better than people maybe giving credit for. To me, I thought like their issue was the fact that Katie Johnson just has never been able to shoot the ball.
Yeah.
He's prone to making a lot of bonehead plays, turns the ball over too much. And he's not a good enough dribbler to really be like a point guard. So you're using him off the ball, and he's only like 6'1". So, like, I just think like that changes the dynamic of like how you're going to play when your two guard is, really ineffective from outside. And so, of course I say that, and he absolutely caught fire and canned like 4 threes or something against Missouri. And, when they blew Mizzou out, but I think like that's one of those things that I've always sort of feel is like held them back a little bit at times. And because I don't, I think Wendell Green, of course, maybe has a little too quick of a trigger finger. He likes to shoot the ball. But he also
got them out of jams by being able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy at late in clock is going to be able to get a shot off, and sometimes getting a shot when you have athleticism on the wing and at the post, guys that can get rebounds, stuff like that's a lot, as opposed to KD, who I think would more likely to dribble off his foot. So who, in your opinion, moving on from Auburn, like has just kind of missed the mark this offseason?
Well, we talked about it. We said probably this conversation would be a bit different if we were talking about Kentucky a month ago versus now. I still think, yes, it's a team that lacks experience, and I think it's a dangerous game to play in this era to not have experience. But they have two guys who are experienced that I think can do a lot of good things, in Reeves and Mitchell. And Mitchell was getting Reeves back was great. Don't get me wrong, but Mitchell, I thought, was a big key just because of the position he plays and getting him added to the mix. And so, I mean, again, I probably would have went more with Kentucky a month ago, like everyone else was doing. I mean, that was a popular thing to do, was dog on Kentucky. But, you can, yes, take what they did at Global Jam, and you can see a lot of good things. But, there are injury questions, right, already, in terms of, having a couple big guys that have been injured, and you always kind of have that question. But so I won't maybe go the Kentucky route just yet, although I still think they probably needed to be a little bit older than they are right now, but they're still as talented maybe as anybody, just with the guys that they're bringing in. You and I had a conversation before we started about Vanderbilt, and it's not that I think Vanderbilt I wouldn't say they had the worst offseason. I think it's for me, like, I find them to be one of the more teams that's harder to figure out. Like, I think maybe that's the better way to put it. So it probably doesn't fit this question necessarily, but but I'm just going to talk about it.
Always being nice as always. Like,
I'm just going to talk about it, okay? Because look, I really look around and I'm thinking about this. So I'm like, can we say South Carolina had a bad offseason relative to where they were, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. Like, they added a couple guys. I mean, Miles Studi, I think, can shoot the ball. That helps. Talon Cooper played a lot of minutes. Minnesota? Like, he'll be a good addition. Like, so I don't think South Carolina had a terrible offseason. Would I still pick them 14th right now? Yeah, BJ Mack.
This is a good, nice
yes,
player.
I'd probably still pick them 14th. But, like, I don't think they had a bad offseason. And so, but really, like, that's the good thing for SEC teams. Is I look around and, like, I don't see a lot. So, like, I think I more go to the teams that I do have some questions about. And I'm going to bring up one after this that I think may surprise you a little bit. But Vanderbilt, like I said, I think it's losing Liam Robbins to me was just huge. And we all talked about, like, he was one. I mean, I think you could do like the advanced stats and everything. The most valuable player in the SEC last year when he was on the floor, just in terms of the things you could track and see how valuable he was to his team. And I think you take him out of the equation now. And yes, I know they won some games down the stretch without him. I understand that. But this is a different team. And as you and I were talking about, it's a team where you're relying on some transfers, guys who are transferring up in a couple different situations, but you're also adding in someone like, Ben Allen Lubin from Notre Dame, a Jordan Williams from Texas A&M, which is not necessarily transferring up, but, didn't really play much. So you have those questions, and you bring back two of the most improved guards, probably not just in the SEC, but in the country, in terms of Tyron Lawrence and Ezra Mannion. So that's a good starting point, is having those two. But I think I just want to see what develops around them, because what we saw develop around them last year was Jordan Wright and Liam Robbins. And those two guys were proven older guys with experience in the SEC that could put it all together and kind of push them forward in moments where they needed big plays in certain, different areas, right? Robbins playing in the front court, Jordan Wright being able to do some things off the dribble, make some shots, make some plays on defense. They don't have that this year around Lawrence and Mannion. They've got breakout players. Maybe that's a Lee Dort. Maybe that's a Colin Smith. Maybe it's one of the new guys they brought in. Their freshman class, mostly, I guess, all made up of guys who are ranked 150th or lower. But I think, and I know you're probably going to say this, and we've always kind of talked about this in terms of where Jerry Stackhouse ranks among SEC coaches. I've always said I think Jerry Stackhouse's biggest strength is player development. And it's just keeping players there, which sometimes they've had a hard time doing, which I think NIL plays a role in that. But if they can just develop the guys that are there, I think you could see Vanderbilt doing the same things towards the end of the season that they were perhaps doing last season. Maybe hard to pull off that kind of run. But I just think from a starting point, without Robbins and Wright, I have questions. And because I don't have a lot of great answers in terms of teams that have had bad off seasons, I will just say maybe they're one that they lose some significant pieces of the puzzle, but they did have a good offseason in that they got Tyron Lawrence back when I think there was a time, or maybe the conversation we just had before Vanderbilt and Auburn would have been a lot different if they'd have added a guy like Tyron Lawrence versus him deciding to return to Vanderbilt. So, yeah. So I said a lot of positive things about a team you asked for me to put into the worst offseason category, but I don't know. But let me ask you this about Alabama. I don't think they had the worst offseason, but I do think this is such a different team that I have a hard time with Alabama too. I know they got a lot of talent, but to me, the one of the most key subtractions of the offseason, I thought, outside the obvious of losing a Brandon Miller and Noah Clowney, Charles Bediako deciding to stay in the draft, I thought was a huge hit for Alabama. Yeah. Because if you added Charles Bediako to this roster, I would probably say, sign me up. They've got that, they've got everything you need, maybe outside of having a Brandon Miller, to maybe not be exactly what they were last year, but maybe they can get close. And you're banking on, again, an Aaron Estrada coming in, being very effective, Latrell Wrightsell coming in, being very effective at guard positions, along with Mark Sears. But, you also did lose Javon Quinterly too. And I think Alabama fans weren't thrilled at times with Javon Quinterly. But what I do know is that he was also a big piece of the puzzle in terms of their guard play. And he had been in that system. Was there inconsistent play? Sure, like with everybody at times. But I still think no Bediako, having a Quinterly paired with the Sears, I would look at this roster probably a little bit differently in terms of where I would project Alabama to be right now. So I don't think they had a terrible offseason by any means, but man, Bediako one is one that I think that that was a significant one, because now I think you're banking on not as much proven talent there, even though you do get a Nick Pringle back. You've got a Grant Nelson coming in, and they got Jaron Stevenson, but I don't know. Bediako to me was just kind of that guy that you could rely on defensively, and that's my thing with Alabama is I don't think they're going to be, I don't want to say anywhere near as good defensively, but man, they were one of the best defensive teams in the country last year. And when you subtract the guys that aren't there, that would be my worry with this particular team right now.
Yeah, I think when you look at Alabama, for me, it's always been about, how are they going to defend? And when they defend, when Nate Oates has been there, they're elite. When they haven't, they're average. Like there's no in between. And I think a large part of that is because the offensive system that he runs, when they're good on defense, it keeps them in games that maybe they wouldn't otherwise be, because they're eventually going to hit some threes. But when they're bad on defense and the other team is able to score when they're going through cold spells, it puts them into bigger holes than maybe they would be otherwise. So, I don't disagree with your assessment there. I know that there was a lot of talk about Estrada and Reitzel. I just, I don't think that those guys are stepping in right away and being all SEC level guards. Nelson has always kind of been the potential guy there, but he's also been inconsistent in shooting the basketball from outside, and he's struggled against high major competition. So, and they don't have an elite freshman coming in. I know Stevenson was a guy who's recruited by or former 5-star. He dropped to a 4-star when he reclassified. But a guy who, a lot of scouts were basically saying, actually, you should probably think about another year of high school and getting stronger and things like that. So, I think Alabama will be pretty good, but it's definitely going to be a step back from where, I think maybe they're accustomed to, or where probably a lot of fans are thinking they're going to be. But I think Nate Oates has kind of proven that even after if they have a bumpy season, he'll get them right back, and they'll be probably as good, if not better, next year. I mean, when you're looking at 5 dudes who rank between 40 and 150, if all those guys come back as sophomores, that's a good haul. So last bit, since we have not talked about Missouri, and I know Dennis Gates is one of your favorite topics, Let's talk about Missouri's offseason. Very clearly, I think they exceeded expectations last year. I don't think maybe your expectations were that they would be a top 4 seed in the SEC, but I don't think many prognosticators.
I thought they'd be better, but that was not my. Okay, I tried to say that many times, guys. Yes, I was on Dennis Gates, but if you think that I thought that they were going to be a top 4 team in the SEC, that's not true. So
yeah. So I thought one of the things that I've noticed about like their the transfers this year are all like, maybe save for Jesus Carolero, who's coming in from Campbell. We're all at worst mid-major plus transfers, coming from other programs, and then, a few high major guys. And I think Oral Roberts, even though they're kind of, more of a true mid-major, Vanover is kind of maybe in the middle because he transferred before that from a high major. So we'll give him the mid-major plus. So upgrading at least where they're getting their transfers from. Do you think Dennis Gates did enough this offseason to kind of put them back in like that sort of like top 5, 6 in the league and be a solid NCAA program, NCAA tournament program?
I mean, here's what's hard for me, because I think last season, as you said, was just such one of those seasons where, don't get me wrong, things went wrong at times, but there were so many things that went right too. And sometimes that's what it comes down to, is you just need a lot of stuff that bounces the right way. And I think it was, forcing turnovers the way they forced turnovers last year to get easier baskets, making threes in a league that can't make threes. Things like that. Like, they were a good offensive team in a league where, quite frankly, very up and down offensively. And they were certainly, I think, better defensively, even though, there were obvious issues rebounding wise and transition defense and those kind of things. But the forcing turnovers helped out in that area. I think what I have an issue with, at least right now, and I don't think it's trying to figure out exactly how to compare this roster to last year's roster beyond just saying there's no Kobe Brown and there's no Demoy Hodge. And so what happens now with 2 guys that were such an important part of their success last season? How do you fill the void? And I think that's where, to me, look, it's an older team. And I think we talked about it. Like, for me, that's why it was so important for, Kentucky. I felt like to add a little bit more, even though you're comparing different rosters. But I think the fact that they stayed old here, and they also were able to, like you said, not just go the route of bringing in nothing but, let's say, mid-major or low-major guys and trying to bank on potential. They did bring up some guys that felt like they fit what Dennis Gates likes to do. And as we know, that's always important. So, a John Tonje, I think someone like that, I felt like from the moment, hey, he's going to Missouri, I said, that to me seems like a Dennis Gates type guy. Like, I feel like he fits in with how they want to play. It's looking beyond some of those other guys, like you've talked about, like Connor Vanover. Yes, he brings things that they did not have on the roster without him. Like, he obviously brings the size and the different things that he has there. Has been in Arkansas. It's a little different now, but like you mentioned, Oral Roberts is not just a program that's just been kind of flailing in the wind over the past several years. They obviously have made a lot of noise, and last season did some good things. And so I'm most curious to see how, and the 2 players for me in particular, and I know you guys have talked about this, but I feel like the season, I don't want to say is going to be defined. I feel like that's going overreacting a bit, but I think the season, what they get from Caleb Grill and Tamar Bates, I think, to me, it's very intriguing, because I see these 2 guys and I see what they can be, like, I think, in this system, the way Dennis Gates wants to play. And I just say, I mean, like, I don't know what the answer is, but like, I'm fascinated. Like, I really am, to see what these guys' roles are on this team, ultimately what they're able to do. And I think it also goes along with the fact that Shawnee's development, Noah Carter, obviously we saw really do a lot of good things, especially down the stretch last season. What you're getting in Nick Honor. And even Aiden Shaw, I think you have to throw him into that mix too in terms of the development. So do I think they did enough, going back to the question, to where I ultimately feel like they're going to be, a top 4 seed in the SEC again? It's hard to say for me because I just think it's, even as high as I am on Dennis Gates, I also know that, Kobe Brown and Demoy Hodge were fantastic. And I think what they brought to the table, you can have a group of guys on this team pick up the production, but I don't know that I see 2 guys on this team that are the same type players that can sort of do the things that they did, which were such a huge part of what they did. So, and their success. And so I think that to me, still the question is to see what this, and I know you guys have talked about this, but I'm most curious if you're doing like a 1 through 7. And so let's say, all right, these are the 7 guys that are going to play the minutes, and here's how the minutes look on this team. I'm very curious to see what that looks like, because I think there are some obvious ones in terms of what Noah Carter would be, what Nick Honor would be. Tanjay, probably keep going down the list, but I'm just curious what, I guess the ultimate rotation is going to look like here. And once maybe you have an idea of what that's going to be, maybe I have a better answer. But for now, I think there's so many SEC teams that have gotten a lot better that, can I say with confidence that I think Missouri is going to finish in the top 5? Probably not, just because I think there's so many other teams out there that have gotten a lot better. And even if Missouri gets better, it's still a wait and see game for me to try to figure out exactly where to put this team. So,
well, to answer your question on like the top 7, at least the fans, Blake, because I ask this every year kind of on Twitter, and the fans have a pretty definitive answer on who they think is going to be in the top 8. We actually, I had 37 different people respond with answers, and there were 8 dudes who got 30 or more votes. Basically meaning that they're on 30 of the 37. So Nick Honor got all, Noah Carter, John Tanji, Caleb Grill got 36, Aiden Shaw got 33, Tamar Bates 32, and Sean East and Connor Vanover each got 30. So that's what the fans expect, at least. Which if you look at kind of like the rest of the roster, it's Kurt Lewis, Trent Pierce, Jesus Carlero, Caleb Brown, Anthony Robinson, Jordan Butler, 3 freshmen, although I think Trent Pierce could find his way into some of those minutes. JUCO transfer, the one guy that they got from a low major, and Carlero. So it seems to be like all the guys they brought back, all the high major transfers, and however you want to sort of slot Vanover, because Lord knows they need some interior presence.
Yes, that's the big thing, right? And that's the thing. Like, I think what I do too here is, and look, I mean, part of it is, coming into this, I told you how big of a Demoy Hodge fan I was, and I think to see him be the player that he became, I'm like, okay, well, now he's not there. And so Kobe Brown, we were just so high on Kobe Brown, and so I think it is part of that where I'm sort of like, okay, man, you have so many things go right in a season like that. And so you take 2 guys like that out of the equation. I'm not taking it like, I know other guys aren't there too, but still, I think they were just such a big piece of the puzzle that I think it's fair to look at this team and say, all right, it's not Alabama. Don't get me wrong. Like, we're not comparing the same situation, but it's a different team, right? Even with some of the guys you have coming back, it's structured a little bit differently because you're subtracting 2 guys that were such a huge piece of the puzzle. And so now, yes, like I'm very interested to see how it plays out. And I think I will go back to the first thing I said when Dennis Gates was hired last year, is I think I give him the benefit of the doubt that even if there are some people who will look at this roster, and I've seen some early projections out there in terms of, picks and predictions on it. We may have did ours. I kind of had Missouri in that tier of.
Yeah, I think there's another writer on your site that wasn't super high on the Tigers, and I got some mentions around that one. I was like, it wasn't Blake. It wasn't Blake.
It wasn't me. I said my thoughts on Missouri, where I would put them in the kind of that tier of teams that I don't really know what to do with them right now. Like, I don't know where ultimately I will settle on putting Missouri, because I think, well, first of all, the reason why I said that, and we did this, I think, a month ago, I said, well, rosters are still not finalized around the SEC. So I got to figure out, who else is still moving. And there's been plenty of roster movement since then. And I think you always just kind of have to look at it in the perspective of the other teams, right? It's not just your team. And I think with Missouri, I will wind up putting them high just because of my Dennis Gates love. We all know it's going to happen. And I like downplaying it as well. I try to make sure, I want to be on the cutting edge of, well, everybody downplayed Dennis Gates and look what he did again. So, but at the same time, I'm a huge fan of Nick Honor, Noah Carter, like I said, Tanjay, and I think the combination of guys that they brought in, like you said, Vanover fills an obvious need. And sometimes that's all you can do is, did you fill obvious needs on your roster? I think they filled obvious needs. And if everything comes together, I think for a second straight year, you're probably looking at a situation where Missouri will be picked lower. People will say, you're not getting the respect after what you did last season. The reason that's going to happen is because there are other teams that have maybe added flashier, pickups and all this other stuff. But it's all about need, and it's all about kind of putting the roster in place you need in place. And to me, I do think that Gates did as good a job as you probably could have done in the situation, like you said, knowing that Kobe Brown was not going to be back. That was going to put some challenges in front of you. And so, yeah, I still thought they did a really good job. So.
And not only that, but not being completely sure if he was going to
come
back for a while. I think really they thought, Kobe, the possibility of Kobe coming back was pretty high there for a while.
Yeah.
Until he just started creeping up draft boards. And then I think once everybody was pretty much saying like, oh, he's like a top 40 guy, I think they probably figured out that he was gone. So that's all I've got for you. I think we were shooting for 30 minutes. We went almost 50, which I think when you get the two of us together, it's just like, oh no. I want to talk about this point. Let's talk about this. Go in detail. But we'll do this again maybe as we get close to the season. We do have finalized rosters, and the online rosters have all been updated, and we can maybe do some more projections. I always like to kind of send out the game by game pick 'em. You're always
that's where you'll really figure out where I'm going to have Missouri, because last year, I didn't have them in the top 4, but I did have them high on our game by game picks last year. So that's where you'll get my full opinion of where I think this Missouri team's going to be at. Which again, a little bias involved. It would probably wind up being higher than I think it's going to be right now. So, yeah.
Blake, is there anything that you want to plug before I let you go?
Well, like you said, I won't plug the rankings we did about a month ago because Missouri fans won't want to see those perhaps. But again, I wasn't harsh on them at all. Max may have been, but that's okay. Everyone has a right to their opinion with that. But no, I mean, Southeastern 14, like you said, you can go over there, check out all the stuff we're doing on YouTube. Obviously, we're deep into football preview season, so we've done quite a few things on Missouri, so you can check it all out over there. And Sam and I always laugh when we're like, oh, we can't do this basketball podcast because Blake's got to do this football thing. And we're like, oh, come on, let's just do basketball, right? So you can find it all there. We'll obviously have a lot more. We're doing our rankings of our positions in SEC basketball. So we did our point guard rankings. Don't worry, I had Nick Honor on my list, even though some people don't want to. He's got to be on there. In terms of your point guard. So we're doing all those. So you can find everything there, and everything else you can follow me on X. I guess. Is that what I'm supposed to say? I'm never really on there anymore, and that's probably a good thing. But you can still try to follow me over there, I guess, if you follow. I don't know if that's the right phrase to use anymore. But
and what's the new Instagram one? Is it Threads?
Yeah, is it the Threads? I guess I don't know.
I think it's Threads, and then I did get a Blue Sky invite. Blue Sky's it's a lot of like writers now, so like reporters and stuff. Not a lot of I think all the like the sports talk is still on
X.
the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, well, there you go. You can follow me on there, and I don't know. I said I'm hardly on there anymore, and it's probably a good thing. So come to YouTube is the better way. To
you can comment and leave
go
nice
anywhere you want.
videos.
Yes.
Leave nice comments on his videos. I'm sure Blake, you read them all. I think you and I get along because we were both basketball people stuck in SEC world, which is very football heavy. So we're reluctant football commenters, but mainly basketball folks. Blake, it's always a pleasure having you on. Thank you for your time. Give him a follow. the Blake Lovell on x.com, and we'll have Blake on again soon. Thanks, Blake.
You got it, my friend. Thanks.
Thank you again to the Blake Lovell for joining me in this podcast. We'll get Blake back on the pod and do some SEC previewing once we actually get a schedule and we can start kind of tiering teams and we have a better understanding where everybody might be going into the year. But he had some really fun stuff to say. Always appreciate Blake's time. And so I will be back with more dive cuts here next week, maybe. We'll see. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Oh, and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great, great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.